Everybody, Dr. Joe's in the house on this Wednesday evening. Hope you're doing well wherever you are. And sorry, a few minutes late, I was in a meeting with about Section 8, in fact. So I'm in Washington, D.C., and they had I don't know, landlord day where they explained to us what was going on with the program and how to navigate the program and things like that. So it's pretty good. So that's what they're doing here in DC. They're trying to outreach to landlords and trying to explain what's happening in the program and things like that. So hope you're doing well wherever you are. And today we've got a great session. Let me get the folks on Instagram on. So let me show that they're going to be live. Okay, good. So I'm on now and everyone's online. So today we're going to talk about BRRRR strategy and specifically, the legal side of things. I know that for those who don't know, BRRRR is the buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat process. And I've been doing that for a long time. And but essentially it's a way to recycle your money. And therefore you don't need as much money as possible to acquire more properties. However, in doing that, there are some things to be considerate about, and one of them is what the topic of today is: permits, paperwork, and problems. The legal side of BRRRR. I thought it'd be an appropriate subject, and hopefully you'll find this quite interesting, and so on. So again, for those people who are new to this live stream, I'm going to be talking about for that another next 20 minutes or so, and provide education. And then in about 20 minutes time, if you've got some questions, we're going to have a Q&A. I call that Ask Dr. Joe. So put your questions in the chat box and I'll try and get to them as much as possible. And for those people who want to do a deep dive on a particular topic, subject that they're having challenges with, you can always book a one-on-one with me. You can go to my website, www.joeasamoah.com. That's www.joeasamoah.com. And you can book a one-on-one with the Ask Dr. Joe link there. So with that said, let's get down to business of today. I know that many real estate investors have lost thousands of dollars, even hundreds of thousands of dollars, because of permit issues, contractor disputes, lease mistakes, legal problems, etc., etc. You go in there all excited about doing your BRRRR, and then, or even going to real estate, and then you run into all kind of issues, and it kind of throws you off. And so as a result of that, you spend many countless hours searching for deals, negotiating financing, renovating distressed homes, finding tenants, and yet you completely underestimate the legal side of all this. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today, because in today's increasingly regulated real estate environment, one overlooked permit, or you don't get a permit, or one bad contract, or one compliance issue, can really, can create lawsuits. You can fail an inspection, you can get refinance delays, stop work orders, unexpected fines, insurance claims, denials. You can get a major financial setback through all this. So the truth is that successful BRRRR investors do far more than simply just buy, renovate, rent, and refinance and repeat. We develop systems that protect their projects, their cash flow, and hopefully their long-term wealth. So the most successful investors, hopefully that's you, and understand the legal protections and operational disciplines are just as important as finding deals and raising money. We recognize that the risks are early, and we take that into the whole thing. We ask better questions, we document everything, and we surround ourselves with experienced professionals who hopefully will help us avoid these preventable mistakes. Unfortunately, many new and intermediate investors learn these lessons the hard way. So some investors purchase properties without understanding zoning restrictions, for example. Others hire contractors without proper agreements or insurance protections. Some fail inspections because the permits were skipped during renovations. Others refinance properties only to discover there were title issues, code violations, or insurance problems. So all these things kind of put it together, and it can throw you off. And that's the reason why in the real world, these things are important. So what I'm going to talk about today, some of the things that I've learned in doing this for the last 35 years, and hopefully I can help you avoid making what I call unnecessary mistakes. Today's session, I'm going to break into 4 parts. I'm going to talk about permits and inspections. I'm going to talk about contractor agreements and construction disputes. I'm going to talk about lease agreements and tenant compliance issues. I'm going to talk about insurance liability and asset protection. And finally, I'm going to talk about refinancing problems and title issues. Okay, so we've got a lot to unpack, I suppose, today. And so let's get down to business. And let's start with number 1 is permits and inspections. Permits and inspections. So the question is, are you renovating your property or building a future lawsuit? Are you renovating your property or building a future lawsuit? Hopefully you're renovating your property. One of the most common and really expensive mistakes especially the residential real estate investors, is failing to properly understand permits and inspections. When I first started off, I didn't understand it. I just did work and, did what I had to do, close the curtains, didn't tell the neighbors. And, that's okay if you don't know, but it's not okay because now I know better. I fully permit all my projects. We do that for a number of years. Having inspections done to make sure everything's compliant with code. Because otherwise you can get shut down if you skip permits. And in the Washington, D.C. area, most of the problems we get with inspections in the city, it's not so much, it's because the neighbors call you in. Whenever you get permits here, you have to go through a process. They have to review your drawings. They have to go through certain levels of reviews: electrical, plumbing, mechanical, building, structural, and all that kind of different things. It has to go through all of that reviews, and then ultimately, hopefully, you'll issue you a permit. And I don't do that. I just go through an architect. I have an architect who understands the process. He understands what the city is looking for in terms of the drawings, the information, and documentation. And he does that. He navigates it through that whole process. Ultimately, they do issue you a permit. It can be a drawn out process. It could take weeks or months, but it does protect you, and that's something which ignorance is no longer bliss. It's just a process. You have to take it into your design, take it into the schedule, and factor that in as part of the financing process. So avoiding permits may appear like you're saving time initially, but it can create greater problems later on during inspections. If you have an inspection, during refinancing, appraisals, insurance claims, property sales, or even tenant disputes. So experienced investors like you and I, hopefully, have learned that permit problems rarely stay hidden forever. It's going to come back out at some point. Investors who renovated basements without permits have later discovered that the city inspectors required that they tear out the walls, remove electrical work, or completely redo work so they can meet code requirements. I recall that, sometimes you get these, I don't know better terms, very, very thorough. Let's just put it that way, very thorough. I almost call them inspectors from hell, who will always find something wrong. And they can be very unreasonable. I recall one house where an inspector told me that the investor didn't pull the permit. He pulled the permits, but didn't get the right inspections. He missed an inspection. So typically you get your build permit, and then you have what we call a roughing inspection, which is, once all the electrical, plumbing, mechanical, all those things are in, then you call the city or the county or the inspector to come in to make sure everything's okay. And once they give their blessings, then you sometimes have to put insulation, and then they then approve for you to what we call close up, which is to put the drywall up in thing. Now, what this person did was to, miss the roughing inspection, and he just closed up anyway, put the drywall on, and then at the end of the project, they called in for a final inspection. And when the inspector came out, he said, "Well, where's your roughing inspections?" And he said he didn't do them. And the inspector asked why, and he gave some excuse. And this inspector, according to him, he said, "Yeah, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to tear all your walls out. I need to see your work. I need to make sure that what you did behind the walls is in fact correct. So it can be a very painful experience if you don't do the right thing. You may be able to, maybe they may tell you to issue what they call stop work, and so on. So these are some of the things that can go wrong when you don't have the right paperwork and inspections and permits and things like that. So successful investors approach permits very differently. Instead of viewing permits as obstacles, we treat them as protection. We understand that permits ensures that renovations meet safety standards, protect future tenants, improve insurability, and also reduce long-term liability. There's a paperwork to say that some third party looked at your work and they approved it. So it does give you a certain level of protection that you would not otherwise have. So, we try to document all these things, make code compliant renovations, and get contractors who know code. Sometimes an electrician, so sometimes you get these, I call them jack of all trades. They know a little bit about electrical, know a little bit about plumbing, and know a little about, HVAC, but they don't know all the details. And sometimes they don't know the intricacies of certain code. And because the codes are always changing. And therefore it's always better, at least for what we do. We have electricians do the electrical work, we have plumbers do the plumbing work, because they have a deep knowledge of each of those trades. And therefore we tend to have less problems when we have our inspections and so on. So, and these people that, electricians, plumbers, structural engineers, safe, all those things, it helps you if you have the right paperwork. If there's any damages, if there's any lawsuits, if there's any tenant injuries, fires, or insurance denials, you have the paperwork, which puts you on a much stronger stand than if you didn't have that. So it's really important. Investors who consistently pass inspections usually develop better contractor relationship. We work with contractors who know code. They have a better reputation, and with both the builders and also with the local municipalities or cities and things like that. Okay, so that's number one. Hopefully that was helpful. And so let's get down to number two, which is contractor agreements and construction disputes. So we've talked about permits. Other legal issues that you could come face to face with on a BRRRR are contractor disputes and construction delays and things like that. So the question is your contractor helping you build wealth or helping you build problems? Is your contractor helping you build wealth or is helping you build problems? Contractor disputes, I mean, they're infamous. We all have them. We've all had them in the past. I've had them. I don't get them too much nowadays because I have some really great contractors. But contractor disputes are among the fastest way to destroy profits and create stress during a BRRRR project. Three things are always guaranteed to happen during a rehab. One, is going to take you longer than what you thought it was going to be. Two, is going to cost you more than what you thought it was going to be. And three, you're going to have some banging of the heads, let's just put it that way, disputes with your contractor. Those things happen all the time. It is what it is, and so on. So many investors have experienced contractors disappearing midway through the project, or maybe disappear after they got the check, demanding additional money with change orders and scope changes, performing poor quality work, shoddy work, missing deadlines, or creating unsafe conditions, that later failed inspections. I mean, all these things happen. But unfortunately, many of these problems begin because investors relied on verbal agreements, vague contracts, or relationships built purely on trust without proper legal protection. So some of the worst investor horror stories that I've heard anyway, begin with contractors who offered extremely low prices or unrealistic timelines. You know the deal. these guys who, let's say a project is $100,000 and they bid, I don't know, $80,000. Okay, so it's everyone's giving you bids for 100,000, and suddenly this guy shows up with an $80,000 bill. And so you're thinking, wow, if I choose this person, I may quote unquote save $20,000, and we all know that something is not right if they can charge so low. And typically they charge a low price to get in, and then they make up the difference, either through change orders, or once they realize that this job really is $100,000 and they come back to you for asking for money and you say, no, I'm not give you any more, then what will happen is that they'll disappear on you, or they'll, reduce the number of people on the job site. So the project just drags on and on and on because they're making no money. They may hire, third parties, unlicensed, uninsured people to work on your job. People who they don't verify references, they're just cheap. So when problems occur, these investors have very little legal protection. So, this is what can happen when you don't do your due diligence on your contractors. However, successful investors, hopefully like you and I, understand that strong contractor management is just as important as finding a great deal. Experienced investors carefully document scope of work, payment schedules, timelines, inspection responsibilities, material expectations, and change order procedures. We do all that before the project begins. So we avoid large upfront fees, payments, like 50% down, 30% down, whatever it is. You pay accordingly based on milestones, based on work completed, and it's all documented. So hopefully we can, avoid problems. But also, what I've learned, anyway, for me, is the importance of communications and documentation. Communication, we typically, at least for my projects, meet once a week with a contractor. We go over the project, we'll go over the issues, go over the financials. If there's any problems, we try to deal with it. So that way we don't, kick the can down the road, and hopefully, we can avoid some of these issues and so on. So documentation is important because it protects you during disputes, and also it allows accountability. So investors who consistently manage contractors professionally often experience fewer delays, better workmanship, smoother inspections, and really stronger long-term business relationships. Okay, so that's number 2. Let's get down to number 3, which is now the house is finished, leases, agreements, and tenant compliance. So get a tenant in. Whenever you're dealing with tenants, there's always issues, and there's always potential liability there as well. So one of the things is, liability associated with renting your property. So the question is, could one lease mistake cost you thousands in lost rent and legal fees? So could one lease mistake cost you thousands in lost rent and legal fees? So what's all that about? Many investors underestimate the importance of a properly written lease and tenant documentation, until a problem arises. Then they realize that they don't have any protection. Lease agreements are not simply, a piece of paperwork. They're really probably the most important legal protection that you're going to have. Weak leases, inconsistent policies, vague language, and poor documentation often create major problems during evictions, disputes, property damage claims, or tenant complaints. Some investors attempt to use generic leases online. I don't know, Walmart. I know Walmart doesn't sell it, but Walmart type leases, generic, that really don't comply with local nuances. And others overlook required disclosures, inspection documentation, lead paint requirements, or local housing regulations. So when disputes occur, these investors discover that poorly written leases may not provide the protections that they expected. In some jurisdictions, however, in some jurisdictions, hey, you're on your own. If you have to go to court, you can't say, Your Honor, I didn't know. Well, you should know. You're in this business. So, so a small lease mistake can significantly delay evictions, disputes, and things like that. So successful landlords, hopefully like you and I, we understand that lease agreements establish expectations, boundaries, and accountability from the beginning of the landlord-tenant relationship all the way through it. So strong investors create systems for tenant screening, move-in inspections, communications tracking, maintenance disputes, maintenance requests, and lease enforcement. We consistently document everything. Yeah, because we understand that the documentation process protects you, the landlord, and also the tenants as well. So experienced investors also understand the importance of treating tenants professionally and respectfully. I said I've been doing this for a long, long time, and I think the last time I went to landlord-tenant court was 12 years ago. If you do this right, you don't have to keep on going down there. It's all about managing a relationship with your tenants and making sure that you build a win-win scenario and screening well so you get the right people. So let's have a look. So kind of halfway through. So if you've got some questions, please put them in the chat box, and I'll get to you shortly, about 10 minutes or so. If you want to book a one-on-one with me, then by all means go to my website, www.joeasamoah.com, www.joeasamoah.com, and you can schedule a one-on-one where you can do a deep dive into any questions, any real estate issues challenges that you're facing. Okay, let's move on to number 4 or 5. Insurance, liability, and asset protection. Insurance, liability, and asset protection. The question is, are you one accident away from financial disaster? Are you one accident away from financial disaster? Well, many investors focus heavily on acquisition, renovations, while neglecting insurance and asset protection planning. Unfortunately, lawsuits, tenant issues, tenant injuries, contractor accidents, fires, water damage, code violation can create devastating financial consequences for the unprepared investors. Some investors only discover insurance gaps after filing claims that are denied because renovations were, unpermitted. Contractors lack proper coverage, or policies fail to cover certain risk. Successful investors treat insurance as an essential part of risk management rather than an unnecessary expense. They work closely with insurance professionals who understand investment properties, vacant homes, construction risk, landlord policies, and liability exposures, all associated with the BRRRR strategy. These investors review coverage regularly and adjust policies as projects transition from acquisition to renovation to rental occupancy. I know for me, typically when we're buying a house, we use what we call builder's risk insurance because the houses are typically vacant. And once we get a tenant, then we transition that into more of a landlord policy, fire policy. So homeowners policies don't work because I'm not living there. So you have to make sure you get the right policy for the type of property that you have. So asset protection also becomes increasingly important as you scale your portfolio. Experienced investors often use things like LLCs, umbrella policies, and professional legal guidance to help separate personal assets from business liabilities. We understand that while no structure provides perfect protection, thoughtful planning can reduce exposure and improve long-term business stability. The most disciplined investors understand that protecting wealth is just as important as creating wealth. You don't want to work so hard to create all these things just to be snatched away from you. Investors who ignore liability risks often place years of hard work in jeopardy. A single lawsuit, major injury claim, or uninsured event can financially cripple investors who lack proper protections. Okay, and finally, number 5, which is all about the refinancing stage of all this. The question is, what happens when the bank refuses to refinance your completed BRRRR deal? What happens when you've done all this work, you're trying to get your money back out, and the bank doesn't want to do it? Okay, many investors assume that the hardest part of the BRRRR is finding and renovating the property. Not always. However, some of the biggest surprises occur during the refinance phase. Investors often discover title issues, permit issues, appraisal concerns, unfinished documentation, code violations, or lender compliance issues that delay or completely derail the refinances. So some investors completed expensive renovations only to discover that unpermitted work prevented appraisers from recognizing added square footage or bedroom count. Others learned that liens that were played by the contractor or unresolved contractor issues will jeopardize your refinance because you can't proceed until all those liens are removed. And there could be some unresolved code violations that will prevent you from refinancing. So there's lots of things that can occur. In some cases, investors are exhausted. All they want, they spent all their money, they got no money left, and now this refinance is dragging on and on and on and on. It could take you down. So experienced investors, we prepare for refinancing from the very, very beginning of the project. We maintain organized records, track expenses carefully, verify permit closures, and also ensure renovations meet lender expectations. Okay, successful investors like you and I, hopefully, we build relationships with lenders who understand the BRRRR strategy and can provide guidance before major problems arise. So strong investors understand the refinance phase. We determine whether capital can be recycled, and therefore we plan accordingly. Refinancing delays can really take you out, especially if you took hard money. And they may have borrowed you the money for 6 months or 12 months, and now you reach the end of that cycle. And so you have to request extensions, which can be very, very costly. Okay, so that's about it I'm going to kind of wrap it up today in terms of putting it all together. Conclusion: the BRRRR strategy has created life-changing wealth for countless residential real estate investors, hopefully like you and I. However, successful investors understand that long-term wealth is not built solely through acquisition and renovations. Sustainable success comes from building systems that protect projects, reduce risk, improve operations, and strengthen long-term portfolios. Investors who ignore permits, paperwork, inspections, contracts, insurance, compliance, and legal protections often learn expensive lessons that could have been avoided. Avoidable mistakes, I call them. The good investors understand the legal discipline and operational excellence create what's it called, long-term advantages. Just do it right. We recognize that documentation, preparation, communications, and compliance are not really just obstacles for the process. They're part of the foundation that supports scalable growth. So these investors like you and I hopefully protect their projects, maintain stronger lender relationships, experience smoother inspections, reduce disputes, and create better tenant experiences. The bad investors often operate reactively instead of proactively. They rush projects, skip documentation, ignore permits, use weak contracts, or rely on assumptions rather than systems. While some may initially save some time and money, many eventually experience delays, failed inspections, lawsuits, refinancing problems, or financial stress that limits their ability to grow. The ugly side of BRRRR investing appears when investors underestimate how quickly small legal problems can escalate to major financial disasters. A missed permit can delay refinancing for months. A contractor dispute can destroy renovation timeline. A weak lease can create eviction nightmares. An insurance gap can expose years of accumulated wealth. So these problems rarely appear in social media success stories, yet they quietly destroy profits for many investors every year. So the good news is that these risks can often be dramatically reduced through preparation, education, strong systems, and professional guidance. Investors who commit to learning from success and failures of others, hopefully others, not you, place themselves in a far stronger position to build sustainable, scalable real estate portfolios. That, my friends, is the education part for today. Hopefully that was interesting. I hope you learned something from that. And again, I'm going to go to the Q&A session. If you got some questions, please put them in the chat box. I'll get to you shortly. If you want to shoot me an email, you can reach me at joe@joeasimo.com. joe@joeasimo.com. And if you want to book a one-on-one with me, go to my the website, joeasimo.com, www.joeasimo.com, and you can book a one-on-one. And yeah, that's it for today. So let's see, what's the time? 7:36. I'll take a couple of questions here. And again, if you got some questions, please put them in. Greetings from Phoenix. Hey, Datu, hope you're doing well. And this is valuable information. Thank you. You're welcome. I think next week, I think May, June the 1st, is a conference here in Washington, D.C. I've been invited to be a panel member. The Grid Con conference. Check it out. I'll be there. I think I'll be there on day one. I was invited a couple of days ago, so looking forward to that one. I think also I've been invited to a conference in Atlanta in mid-June, and I will be going to Dominica, the Caribbean, probably sometime June or July. That'll be the 1, 2, 3. This will be the 4th overseas trip for the year, and I've still got a couple more to do. Yeah, it's all good. So if you got some questions, please put in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to get myself a little rest, relaxation. I hope you're doing well wherever you are. I hope that the economy is shifting a little bit. I know it's getting more challenging for landlords to find tenants, good tenants, and but this is the time to put systems in place. My longest tenant, believe it or not, is 30 years this year. 30 years. And so we're celebrating that. I got a 24-year-old tenant as well, 24 years with me as well. And last week was Mother's Day, so I sent all my tenants Mother's Day gifts. And these are some of the little things. It's all about relationship management at the end of the day. You're dealing with human beings, and if you can build and nurture relationship with your tenants, good tenants will stay longer, they'll pay the rent, less drama, and that's what you want. Okay, my friends, I'm going to wrap it up for today. Hope you had a good time, and I will see you next Wednesday. And have a great weekend, and I'll speak to you next Wednesday on another Wealth Wednesday. Take care. Bye for now.